Welcome back to the book club. Today I'm going to be talking about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Now, this is a book that I came across in a bit of an interesting way. For those of you who have a Goodreads account, you may occasionally get emails about giveaways or sweepstakes that they're having for books that are on your want to read list. And I actually got this book through one of those giveaways. Interestingly enough, I think it was right around this is the like 20th edition, 20th anniversary edition version of this book. And I think it was right around when this was coming out on Goodreads. They did a giveaway for it. I entered because you never know if you're going to win. I just don't expect that I'm going to, and I actually did. I got a free book. I got a free book. And this is a book that's been on my radar for a while. Clearly, it was on my want to read list on Goodreads. I saw a lot of chatter about it on the fantasy subreddit. And I just kind of was looking for an excuse to maybe finally give it a go. And getting it for free was definitely that excuse I needed. So a few weeks ago, about mid January, I started reading it. I wrapped up reading it last weekend, and I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts. Um, Overall, I'll say, the sort of grand conclusion of all this is that I don't think this book is really for me. I think there's a lot of reasons why it didn't necessarily work for me, but I I don't want that to come across as this being a bad book by any means. In my opinion, I think it's a good book that just didn't work for what my taste is. So a little bit of background about what this book is, the way it's written, maybe why it wasn't for me. So this book is in the speculative fiction genre, and it's kind of an alternative history. So not your traditional fantasy story with wizards and stuff. It's set in 19th century England, and it is the story of a couple of magicians, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and basically how their magic affected England, and kind of is like a almost like a story about their lives, and sort of what led up to the ultimate climax and sort of conclusion of the book. And I think because it was very alternative history, it was written in a way that a lot of historical fiction or like history books are written, or at least like how in my head they're written, where there's just a lot of detail about very innocuous conversations that don't have much to do with anything, don't really push the plot along or even really cause any intrigue. They're just kind of like flavor for what life was like for these people. And so I think that there are people out there that enjoy that kind of thing. They really like getting into the world and into the characters and knowing all these minute details, and are cool sitting in a little room with the characters while they're having a conversation about the possible effects of magic. But when that doesn't actually relate to the plot at all in a meaningful way, like they're not hinting at something that's going to happen later or whatever, for me it just really doesn't work very well. Now, there's a lot of things that I do think are interesting about this book. One of them is that the way that it's written, there's a lot of footnotes. I actually just opened two things I want to talk about. I opened a random page and found. So one is that there's some illustrations which I actually think are pretty cool. They aren't very frequent, but they add a little bit of flavor, and I think they really fit the kind of like time period style and kind of how they help me envision, what I should be thinking about when I'm reading. And then also the other note is that there's footnotes in this book. If you look at the very bottom there, the authors included footnotes, kind of like as if it's a history book. And there's most of them are kind of innocuous, like, oh, this is a reference to some book that doesn't actually exist, and it's kind of a fake reference. Sometimes it's like, oh, of course, like this is the fairy tale of blah, and then in the footnote, it actually, the author writes what the fairy tale of blah is. And I actually really enjoyed those moments. I thought it was kind of cool to like kind of get taken out of the narrative, reading the footnote of what this like random fairy story that like everybody of the time knows about, what that story is, and sort of it doesn't relate to the plot at all. It's completely separate. It's just like a little bit of fun flavor, and that's the type of flavor thing that I actually really liked. Um, so I guess it's tough for me to come up with things that I actually enjoyed, because I really I struggled to continue reading the book because there just wasn't the plot was predictable in a way that it didn't quite end exactly how I would have predicted, but the general gist of where the climax was going was exactly where I thought it would be going. And there wasn't anything too like crazy or surprising that happened where I was like, oh wow, this was really like worth the 800 some odd pages that it took to get there. I think the core plot of this book could have been like 250, 300 pages and nothing would have been lost. But I will admit that's not what the point was. And so that's again why I think this wasn't a book for me, but I think it's a book for some other people. I think that extra 500 pages of detail about these fictional people's lives and what they think about bringing magic back into England is all very interesting for people that are really into diving into those types of things. Whereas I'm definitely more of like a plot and character focused person where I kind of want everything to be centered around either moving the plot forward in some way or like exploring some like deep lore that's going to somehow relate to the plot or have some weird philosophical connotation or like make you think about something outside of the book. And that doesn't happen a ton. I think I guess another reason why I think a lot of people do like this book, and a reason why I can't quite connect to it is it definitely draws on the style of other 19th century writing. So this is written as if it's a 19th century book on sort of these people's lives. And as a result, it pulls from authors like Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. These are authors that I have no experience with. I don't know I haven't really read anything by these authors besides just knowing vaguely who they are. I'm aware of Dickens and I've heard of Jane Austen before. That's about the extent of like my familiarity with their writing. And so honestly, I think that I'm missing a lot by not understanding the sort of context within which this book was written. I think there's like a lot of probably humor is maybe not the right way to put it, but like things that are supposed to be like comedic comedic in the way that they would have been comedic if they were written in the 1800s. And as a reader in 2025, if I was familiar with the writing of people in the 1800s, maybe I would have been like, "Oh, this was something that they found funny back then. Like this is kind of a joke and not really whatever." But when I'm reading it, I don't have that context, so I kind of just whatever it is, it goes over my head, and I feel like because of that, I'm definitely missing some of like the value that I could be getting out of this book. And I think if I revisited it after diving more into authors that were prominent in the 1800s, I might actually pull more out of the book and get more enjoyment out of it. So I do think people that are maybe more familiar with like literary fiction, and or just like literary fiction in the 19th century, maybe, then you may actually get more out of this book as well. I'm coming from a background of mostly being a fantasy reader and not reading much many serious big boy adult books. And as a result, like a lot of sort of like the maybe classical references go so far over my head that I'm just kind of like my eyes are glazing over and I'm just reading through it. Um, and I guess one more thing that I will say too is I actually think the last like 100 pages or so were actually probably the best part about the book. I think the climax, once magic really starts becoming this like crazy thing, um, it really did start to actually grip me, and I was able to sort of read through the end of the book without feeling like I was just okay. It's another day. I need to just keep reading through this book so I can get on to the next one. Which is definitely like the worst place you want to be within a book. I knew I didn't want to finish it, or I didn't want to not finish it. I did want to get to the end the whole time, but I really had to like push myself to keep reading it every day. But once I hit the sort of tipping point in the plot, things really started to come together. You really get a clear picture of where it's going, and it kind of ends in an interesting way that makes you think a little bit, um, makes you rethink some things that happened prior a little bit. And so ultimately, there's a reward at the end. It's not like there's some books that I've read. You finish the book and you're like, well, what was the point? I wish I dropped it 200 pages in when I thought about it. But this book, I think it was worth it overall. Again, it's a little on the long side. I mean, if you look at this is a very thick book. Um, it is quite a lot of commitment to sort of read through this. I'm trying to see what the actual page count's like 840 something pages. Um, it's quite a big book to get through. There's a lot in here, and again, I think really depending on what type of speculative fiction or fantasy you're into is really going to change your overall perception of this book. It's again something I've seen on the fantasy subreddit a lot. A lot of people recommend it. They sing its praises, and I love that for those people. I don't think I would recommend this book to somebody unless I knew more about their reading taste and like knew that they would like this type of book. But unless I knew they liked this specific type of book, I would be kind of hesitant to actually say, "Oh yeah, you should check out Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell." Um, there's another book by the same author. I think it's Piranesi, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm looking at Wikipedia right now. Yeah, Piranesi, if I'm saying that right, or Piranesi, I don't know. I've also heard a lot of good things about that book as well, and I do plan on checking it out eventually. Maybe if I get lucky, I'll win it in another Goodreads giveaway when the 20th uh, 20th anniversary edition comes out. Um, but I am actually curious to read more of Susanna Clarke's writing in maybe a different context because I actually thought the prose was pretty good. It was clearly written very stylistically, and it was written in a style that was supposed to be again reminiscent of these like 1800s authors. But I thought like the way that she was writing things and the way that she was communicating was actually, pretty compelling, pretty interesting. I think the like scene descriptions were very good. The prose isn't overly complex or anything. It's kind of very much like straightforward, telling you a story, with the narrator sometimes sliding in a couple extra things here and there, which I thought was pretty fun. So I'm definitely interested in trying out more from this author. Not ready to quite give it up, but ultimately that's kind of where I was at. I didn't know much about what this book would be about going into it. All I've like read online was, oh, this is a good book. You should check it out. And so that's how it ended up on my Goodreads list. That's how I ended up just getting it in the giveaway, I guess. Um, and so I was a little bit, surprised when I actually started reading it and I realized what it was, and I kind of knew immediately it wouldn't quite work for what I typically enjoy. But it is what it is. I do think ultimately it's good to get out of your comfort zone every once in a while, read a book that you wouldn't normally read, and then reevaluate why you did or didn't like it, or why you don't read books like that, or whatever, and do a little bit of introspection. Right before this book, maybe this is kind of why it was more of a struggle as well. Right before I read this book, I read East of Eden by Steinbeck, which is also just outside of my general reading preferences. Again, I'm mostly I just read fantasy books kind of guy. So reading East of Eden was just like very out there. And I enjoyed that a lot, but I think maybe I was looking to transition back into a pure fantasy story that I would really enjoy. I probably should have just read the next Wheel of Time book that I'm working through to like get my fantasy fix. And then if I revisited this with my fantasy palette has been, uh, you know, filled up, cleansed, whatever. I don't know. My I'm full of fantasy. I could use a little bit of a break now. Maybe this would have also hit a little bit different. Um, so I think there's maybe a lot of reasons why um, this could have been a better experience for me. But honestly, I think if you really enjoyed this book, I would love to know a little bit more about what other books you enjoy and why you liked it so much. And feel free to call me an idiot for like not getting it or something, because I do think that um I at least feel sometimes when I don't like a book that a lot of people like, that maybe I just don't get it. Like I'm missing some important context. And because I don't have that context, or like I haven't read these other books that are related, um, maybe by different authors, but still like it, gives me the idea of what I should expect for this book, then it would make a lot more sense. I don't know. So if that's the case, let me know in the comments below. I would love to know. Um, I don't necessarily think that you need to enjoy every book that other people enjoy as well. There's certainly books that I don't enjoy that are quite popular. There's books that other people hate that I enjoy. We all love our trashy books every now and then. But yeah, I would love to know. If this book also didn't work for you, I'd also like to know a little bit about maybe why it didn't work for you. I think we can all practice a little bit of introspection, think about why we didn't like things that much, and explain them in a way that maybe isn't just, book bad. And we can all kind of level up our own selves a little bit. But I think that's all I have for this one. Let me know again what you think about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell in the comments below. Let me know if I'm a total idiot who is just missing the point and missed all the jokes, and I should have enjoyed this book a lot more. Uh, and I'll see you next time.